Katie, it's so awesome to have you here today. I know we had a couple conversations before this, and I was so glad to have met you here in Nashville. So I'd just love to start off by, just tell me a little bit about yourself. I know you're working on a lot of things right now. Just kind of give a little bit of layout of everything that you're working on so that we can continue to explore more about what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am an almost Nashville native. I moved here when I was 4. So
I'd call that Nashville native.
Okay. I just can't be, I just can't claim something that's not fully true. But yeah, so I've definitely seen the growth in Nashville, moved back here after being gone for a little while, and love it. And since I've been back, have gotten involved in real estate. So I am a full-time realtor with simpliHŌM.
In a perfect spot for it because Nashville is booming.
Growing, yes, like crazy. So I am a full-time realtor with simpliHŌM and have started an organization called Women Who Own. And so that organization is focused on helping women through the home buying process and providing education, community, resources, and support to help them through that process and make sure that they feel confident and educated and knowledgeable every step of the way.
Yeah.
So my background is education. I went to University of Tennessee and have a master's in secondary ed. And so to me, that's the most important part. When you are making the biggest purchase of your entire life, you need to not just be signing documents because someone told you to, but you need to really understand and feel confident throughout the whole process.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
So I think that's where the education piece comes in. So
yeah, that's so important. I mean, because I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I would feel like typically it's like a male-dominated, buying market and selling market too, where it's typically either the husband or a guy that is running through the whole process. So women are kind of just left behind in that whole regard. So I think it's so cool what you're doing. Can we talk a little bit more about how you got started with how did you think of this idea? Because it's just so. I mean, I've never heard of it before, and I love it so much.
Yeah, absolutely. So I found myself buying my first house after I went through a divorce. I was 37 years old, single, and buying my first house.
Stress.
Yeah. And that is not how I saw life going. And I know there's a lot of other people that are in that same situation. And I remember at one point through the process, I had someone saying, please make sure your husband's home, to help make this decision. And I'm like, and they said make sure every decision maker is here. And I'm like, I'm here.
Yes.
Yes. And that's
it's just kind of like a stab.
Yeah.
It's just
yeah.
It's like, no, I can do this.
And a lot of times, when people are married or, you're with a partner, you may rely on that partner for those things. Mm-hmm. And traditionally, a lot of women end up not being involved in the finance or financial decisions, whether that's in purchasing a home or whether that's even in your personal finances within the home. It's very, very common that the husband or the male partner is the one that usually handles all of that.
Yep.
And so being in that situation, I would have loved a community that was focused on education, that I could go with other women that are going through the same process, have the same goal of homeownership. And then a piece of it that we provide is that everything is taught. We provide free education classes and everything is taught by other women in the industry. And I just think there's a lot of power when women come together. Yeah. And I think there's understanding that we want to, support each other and empower each other. And so that's kind of one of the big keys with Women Who Own is that everything is, we offer women in the industry to help support you along the way. And so my experience of purchasing my house, while it was great and lovely and, and fine, I would have loved
someone to walk you through the process, understand the documents, what is the title company actually doing behind the scenes? I don't understand any of that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so that education background of mine really makes me passionate. When I have people say, I'm sorry, I have another question. I'm like, no, don't apologize.
Yes.
I would welcome 200 of your questions before you signing something that you're not really sure what we're doing.
What are some of the biggest challenges that you see women facing when buying a home nowadays?
Well, home ownership really, it's a two-income space, unfortunately. And so I think what's really tough is if you've been renting for a while, and then you look to see, okay, I think I'm ready for home ownership, but what can I afford? Well, when you're doing it by yourself, you're going to be able to afford obviously less than when you're doing it with a partner. But what I really try to have people focus on is we need to shift our mindset and manage your expectations, because really early on, we need to be thinking of this purchase as an investment.
Yes.
Like, this is not your dream home. And I know as much as you want to think that you're spending this much money, you're going to get everything you want, you're not.
Your giant walk-in closet.
Yeah. Yes. Your island, your quartz countertops, like those come slowly along the way. And so I think that challenge for women is, okay, well, I'm living in this really nice apartment though already, paying whatever rent, and I have to take a few steps, what feels like backwards.
Right.
And that's hard to feel like you're stepping backwards when, your whole goal always is to move forward with
Exactly.
things.
And it's hard to understand equity too.
Yes.
Especially when you've been renting and, your rent is probably maybe even cheaper than it would be for a mortgage, but you're building that equity in the house. And that probably is something that's a little challenging to understand at first or to convey to new home buyers.
Yes. And that's exactly, I said, you need to think of this as an investment, and not that you're renting it out to someone. You're investing in yourself and your future.
Yep.
Because every month when you're paying that mortgage, that's a little bit more money that you're putting into your home savings.
Exactly. And then
account.
your home's value, or is it just the equity? What actually attributes to your net worth as an individual's net worth? Is it the equity in the house, or is it the whole home value?
So the home value is made up of the equity.
Okay.
So what you have paid in, and then also, especially being in Nashville, the value of your home is growing at a pretty quick rate.
Yep.
And if you owned, in 2019 or 2020, it grew at an, unheard of rate, which really isn't sustainable, and so it probably won't continue to grow that quickly. But it is still growing at a large rate that often outpaces the stock market even.
Yep.
So your value on what it's worth is growing, and then you also, in addition to that, are putting money in every month with your mortgage.
Exactly.
That is also increasing. The value of it,
and that
too.
increases your overall net worth, and then that helps with your credit. That helps with so many different things, in life if you have a higher overall net worth.
Exactly. And when you go to sell, now you have a chunk of money here that you're going to put towards your next place, and you're going to get a few more of those things on your wish list.
Exactly. So that you can maybe even get your dream home in that house.
Small steps forward.
Yep.
But if you weren't doing that, if you're going to stay in that really nice apartment that you're in, which is fine, but you're throwing that money away you're not making forward progress there. So while it feels like you might be taking a few steps backwards because it's not quite as nice as what you were in, in the big picture, you're making forward progress with home ownership.
So someone that's currently renting, what are some of the pieces of advice that you give to them if they're looking to buy a home that they can start to, do so that in the future they can actually have that down payment and they can do it, the whole buying process?
Yeah, absolutely. So my recommendation is to talk with a lender and talk with a realtor early. And even if you know that it might be a year or 2 years down the road, but what's important is to have somebody look at your finances from a lending perspective, and they'll do this with no expectation of anything, but look at it and see where you're at.
Is it free to
It is. Okay. 100%. Yes, it absolutely is. And they will take a look at your debt and your income, and they'll look at all of those pieces so you can figure out, okay, can I afford anything right now? And if I can't, that's fine, but let's put a plan together to get there. And so if you don't start that until a year later when you think you're ready, you might not be ready. You might talk and they might find more things that need to be done, or maybe your credit needs to be improved a little bit.
Yep, I was going to ask about credit,
Yeah, and so doing that as early as possible, and then saying, hey, my goal is in 2 years. So let's see where I'm at, because you need your baseline before you can figure out what you need to do to get yourself into a position ready to buy. And people will talk, lenders will talk with you, realtors will talk with you, and that's really the goal. So we offer classes through Women Who Own, and that's the goal, is that you might be 2 years out, but have that conversation now so that you can put a plan in place, to figure out how to get yourself there so that you will be ready.
Does Women Who Own, will you recommend lenders and everyone so that the women can actually go and start to formulate that plan and then have the coaching alongside?
Yeah, for sure. So I work with a handful of really great female lenders, title attorneys, financial advisors even. I actually have a financial advisor that teaches the class with me, and she offers all the women who take my class a free year of financial planning.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so she'll work with you for the entire year to put together a budget to start making, meeting your goals.
That's
But yes, and
I wish I
then-
knew about that.
Yeah.
Because I went through the home buying process by myself at first too. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
And then I have lenders. A lender that I work with regularly, she's actually a certified divorce lender. And so if you are going through divorce, she works with men and women. But if you're going through a divorce, she will actually work with you through the process with your divorce team and your lawyers to make sure that, whether you should keep your married home or you should sell it or buy your spouse out, or that you can afford whatever it is. When it comes down to it, you don't end up with a payment you can't afford or whatever the best financial
because all the complications are in the backside that you're not really thinking of.
Correct.
You may have owned a home previously with, your ex, and now you have to figure out that whole aspect before you can move on to the.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't think about that.
Yeah. So those services are totally free too. And so she'll work with people through that. So there's a lot of resources out there and a lot of people that want to help and want to see others succeed. It's just a matter of connecting with the right people that are in it for the right reasons.
That's so awesome. Could we talk a little bit about how important credit is when buying a home? Because I feel like that's a huge topic of discussion and no one really truly understands. At least I don't, most people, I don't think they really understand how important their credit is when it comes to, getting that mortgage approved. So do you want to just talk a little bit about what you see as some of the downfalls, I guess, maybe some of the challenges that people face when it comes time to buying a home in regards to credit?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're in college and you have all of those tables that are set up and they're offering free pizza and free t-shirts if you sign up for this credit card.
Yeah.
The credit cards themselves are not a bad thing. In fact, they're an important part of establishing your credit. But what's really, really important is that you're paying off that bill every single month. So there are a lot of different ways that you can establish your credit, whether that is through paying your utilities on time, your your cell phone bills on time. You can establish credit through a lot of different ways, but a credit card is an excellent way to establish credit if you are using it as a debit card. And I'll tell a story too, because yes, I think most people don't know, and a lot of times we think of credit cards as bad, and they are when
you don't pay them off.
You don't pay them off. Yes, when you're using them as free money, they absolutely are. And I was married. We had joint accounts for everything, and he had a credit card, and I just had my debit card. And he kept saying, Katie, you should really get a credit card. I'm like, I don't need a credit card. You have a credit card. I have a debit card. We have the joint account. I don't need it. And he was deployed, and I was overseas, and I needed to get back home and rent a car and all of these things, which you can do, but it's just a lot more work with a debit card instead of a credit. So finally I was like, okay, I'll get a credit card. So I got my credit card, and little did I know, 10 years later, I was going to be going through a divorce, and I did. But thankfully I had 10 years of perfect credit history with that credit card that helped to establish my own personal credit history. Yes. Because if I hadn't had that, and I don't, a lot of times our utilities were in his name, and I would have come out without any credit. And if you don't have any credit, you can get a loan, but your interest rates are going to be a lot higher.
Yep.
So you're going to get a much, much, much better deal. Like the number one factor, I believe, I need to check this with the lender, but I'm fairly certain that the number one factor in determining your interest rate is your credit score.
Wow. Okay.
Because they want to make sure that they're going to get their money back. But thankfully, I ended up getting that credit card however many years ago, and so I had all of those years of credit. And so that is such an important thing, that you establish that and that you take good care of it.
Yeah, because especially if you're younger too, you don't really think about those types of things. Right. And a lot of the times, the younger generation might even still be using their parents' credit card instead of something in their own name.
Yes.
So they're not actually generating their own credit. And then when it comes time to buy a house, they're, hurting in that regard.
I wish I had known that earlier. And I would say that's something that I'd probably recommend is for parents to get that for their kids, knowing that it can be, knowing your child and knowing that it can be used responsibly and correctly. But that's huge to be able to get your credit score up early.
Yeah. So, going back, what are some of the questions that the women come to you and ask? I'm just genuinely interested to know, what are some of the things that they're, the most stressed about, most concerned about when they're working with you? Yeah.
So a lot of it is usually, can I afford the house? I don't want to get stuck with something that has all kinds of problems and issues. Like, how am I going to know, for the inspection period? who am I working with? So we really go over the different players throughout the process.
Yes.
You're going to have a realtor, and the realtor is not the same thing as your lender or your title attorney, that we all have separate roles that we do. And so what that looks like. And then another big thing, which has been big in the news lately, but is, what do I owe? If I'm working with a realtor, if I'm buying a house, what do I owe, and who pays what? And so I think it's just really, truly understanding the process. Another big question is, how much of a down payment do I need?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
20%?
No. No, you don't. So there are all kinds of different loan types that require different amounts, from 0% all the way to about 3.5%. So 20% is really never required. You can, if you do have 20%, you can avoid an extra fee called a private mortgage insurance.
Okay.
And so if you put 20% down, then you do not have to pay a private mortgage insurance. And essentially all private mortgage insurance is a little extra protection for the lender, because you don't have as much skin in the game as they do. And so that's just a little extra payment that they're going to make you pay every month, because they're taking a little bit bigger risk on you.
Right.
But it isn't required to put 20% down. And in some situations, it's not worth it to wait until you have that 20%.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example. I'm kind of going off topic here.
No, this is good. It's interesting.
An example. So there was a family, and I think it was in 2020, and really didn't want to buy right then, because they wanted to wait until they could put the full 20% down to avoid the private mortgage insurance, which oftentimes can be about $250 or so. It depends on the size of your loan per month on top of your mortgage. And so they wanted to make sure they had the full 20% saved before they bought a house. Well, come 2021, 2022, and you know how quickly home prices rose. You might have a $250,000 condo that is now going for $380,000 over the course of those 2 years.
Yeah.
And so while you were trying to save that $250 a month extra from the private mortgage insurance, so you were waiting to purchase
at that price,
that home price has now jumped $100,000. And so it's not always, waiting to have 20% isn't always the right thing to do. Sometimes, having that extra $200 a month for private mortgage insurance is worth purchasing, and then later on refinancing when you can get rid of that.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's a big question. You can also put 0% down if you're doing a rural loan, a USDA rural loan, 3% down for an FHA loan. So there are a lot of programs and loans out there that you do not need 20% to put down.
Do lenders oftentimes, everyone's trying to sell their business, right? So do you ever find that lenders sometimes try and sell homeowners something that they might not be able to actually afford, or that might not actually match, the best thing for the homeowner at that, or for the potential buyer at that point? Or are they really trying to actually get the homeowner the best deal?
The lenders I've worked with, I really feel strongly that they are looking out for.
Okay, good.
Looking out for the
genuine.
Homeowner. I do. Yeah, I really do. And that's, if I felt like there was somebody that was doing that, that's not someone that I'd be referring anybody out to. And I'm sure there are people, like, it's a sales business. Real estate is a sales business as well. And so I'm sure that there are people, that are willing to do that. But with the people that I work with, like, I really, truly feel like they are looking out, for the best interest of them, because the last thing you want is to get someone into a house that they can't afford, they're not happy with, they felt like they made the wrong decision. And again, I think a lot of lenders, I know specifically for me, like, I am working for this one person, but my goal isn't just to get you in a house. My goal is that you had a really great experience, and that you're really happy with everything, you felt really confident, and then you tell your brother, and you tell your neighbor and your friend. And so it's not one, get one person into it. I want to get 6 people, because you had such a great experience. And so you're not going to have a great experience if I push you into something that's not right for you just to get it done. The same way with lenders, like, they want to work with you, they want to work with your siblings, your kids, all of those things.
Referrals are very important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so really making sure that people have a great experience, and don't get in over their head is important. So, and I think a majority of them really take that seriously.
Nice. That's really good to know. So you did mention at one point inspections is something that comes up as a question often. What are some of the things that you see most often when inspections come back that homeowners probably could have avoided in the past if they had done some preventative maintenance? Or what are some of the problems that you see with inspections that cost the homeowner, I guess the seller at this point, the most money?
Yeah. Inspections are so important. Never skip your inspection. So I would say roofing is always a big thing because that's a huge expense for the seller. So maintenance of the gutters, maintenance of just the roof, in general, making sure that it's upkept. And the other thing is your HVAC system. So that's anything that's going to be a huge expense for that buyer coming in. They would like to try to avoid that. So regular maintenance of your HVAC system, having someone come out every year to take care of it. Those are the things that are going to cost a bit of money for the seller to repair.
And it does come out of the seller's pocket.
It does. It can always be negotiated.
True. Yeah.
So it may not, and they may negotiate so that they won't do any repairs. But those are the big things that buyers are really looking at, is usually your HVAC, your roof, and then any kind of safety issues. So if there's electrical issues or plumbing, any kind of leaks at all. And that's something that most people usually agree to fix because they know, nobody wants water. That's immediate damage.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. And so any kind of plumbing that really needs to be, be fixed.
Taken care of. Very important.
Yes.
Is there any way for inspectors to tell the history of the home? So are new home buyers looking to understand, hey, was there ever a flood here? Did you ever have any serious water damage? Was there a fire, electric fire behind the wall that we don't know about? Is there any way for the inspector to get that information to the new home buyer?
So they are only giving what they see during that 3-hour time frame that they're looking at. So they'll, if they can tell that there's been damage, then they will report that it appears to be, or that there is evidence of. But they don't have a great way to show the home's history, honestly. And so what they do is they take a snapshot of right now, what I see right now, and they are going to document everything. So that homeowner is going to get, that buyer is going to get about a 40 to 45 page report after that inspection of everything that the inspector notes, sees, observes, and they'll give not necessarily an opinion, but they'll give whatever the current codes are.
Like a safety rating almost.
Yes, exactly. But as far as knowing, what was done in the home or how it was upkept, that's just not really
Is it up to the buyer then to figure out what they want fixed, or do you then step in that process as the realtor, as the agent, and say, hey, this is what I highly recommend, we either negotiate or you take care of, or we make sure that the seller takes care of?
Yeah, so the reports can be really intimidating, honestly.
Yeah, 45 pages is definitely...
Yes, and especially if you have an older home, because I tell my buyers, I'm like, expect you are going to have a full page of things that are wrong with the home, and be prepared for that. But they're not all, major deals.
It's almost like when you get your car, like if you're just getting your oil change and they come back and they're like, you need a whole new alternator. And you're like, wait, what?
Yes. That's a point in a transaction where, if things fall apart, usually it's during the inspection period. And those reports can be really intimidating for sure. And so ultimately it's up to the buyer as far as what they feel comfortable with, right? I might have a buyer that comes in and has zero home maintenance experience and wants nothing to do with these minor things that need to be done. Or I might have someone that comes in and, that's their side job, or they grew up doing this, working in their family business. And so, an electrical issue, that's no big deal. Or, fixing the flashing, on the roof, that's no big deal. Whereas someone else might say, roof, I'm not doing it.
I want nothing to do with it.
So it's really very individual to the buyer. And I usually try to talk people down on a lot of things that really aren't huge deals. But also it's important to elevate the ones that are like, hey, this is definitely something that I would, ask to be repaired. So I try to play that mediator role in there. Ultimately, it's the buyer's decision.
Because you've seen in the past where, you know, maybe a buyer didn't pay as much attention to the inspection that they should have, and then later on down the line, they're calling you like, what? My roof is leaking, and we should have taken care of this in the past, and now do you have anyone that you can recommend?
Last week, actually.
Really?
Yes, I had a friend, and she had a waterfall come down from her second floor to her first floor into her kitchen, and has no ceiling in her kitchen right now, and is getting all new floors.
This was just a home that was just bought?
She bought it last August. Yes.
That's not supposed to happen.
I know, it's a new home. It's 3 years old too.
What?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So.
Is it just something that didn't come back in the report, or is it did they have a huge storm?
No storm. It was a pipe that I want to say burst. Burst might not be the right word because it wasn't frozen because it's a million degrees here. But it was a pipe that busted somehow in her bathroom and gushing water down.
I'm sorry about that.
So, and it wasn't.
If you need a restoration company, there are some ways we can help there.
Yes. That's what she called me. She was like, hey, you know, and it wasn't disclosed in the property condition disclosure, which, you know, if there was an issue but it had been fixed, it doesn't have to be disclosed in there.
Right.
So it's an inherent risk.
I bet that's like a lot of liability on you, where, I mean, if you're making the recommendations for, even if it's after you sell the home, a lawn care company or a housekeeping or a junk removal, that's kind of a lot of liability on you to make sure that it's a high quality vendor.
Right. Yes. And that's where it's important to know who you're working with, that it's people that you trust, that you know, that you feel confident in your recommendations. I mean, you never want to tell a friend, because a client, you know, when you're working with them through this process, they become friends. Like, I never want to tell a friend and give a recommendation they have a horrible experience with
or
someone.
they're way too expensive, or, you know, they don't really show up on time.
Yes, that is super important, and that's just not, you know, if I want people to really trust me through the process, I want them to be able to, I want to be able to trust, like, who I'm recommending to them too. So
I mean, that whole concept is just another layer of stress, and then you want them to obviously come back to you, like we talked about before. You know, their brother, their sister, their family member, you know, recommend Katie to help sell their home or to buy a new home.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit about the new commissioning structure. I think, is that being implemented this Friday?
Yes.
I would love to learn more about it for myself.
Sure.
And to hear from, you know, a professional's perspective on, you know, what changes are happening in the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. So, there are a lot of changes and not so many changes all in one. So I think the biggest change is the transparency. Which I think is an important piece. So a realtor's commission for both the selling side and the buying side has always been negotiable. But I don't think the conversations have been presented in a way that it feels like it's negotiable. And so what has traditionally happened is that oftentimes the seller provides both the selling agent's commission and the buying agent's commission. And they usually provide that up front, because oftentimes the selling agent will say, hey, I work for this amount of money, and I'm going to split half of this with the buying agent.
Right.
And that's how that conversation goes with the seller. And the seller says, okay, you know, great, if that's what you work for, that's what I'll pay. And so then that agent, when they put the house on the MLS, there is a little field that says a buyer's agent compensation, whatever they've agreed with, whatever that agent is going to split, that gets put into that little field. Okay. And so anytime I look for a house on the MLS, I can already see, before I even go to see the house, that seller is willing to pay this amount towards a buyer's agent.
Gotcha.
And so traditionally, the buyers have not typically had to pay their agents, because usually it is paid for by the seller.
Right.
Now, in a situation of like a for sale by owner, that's one that you'd have to have more of a conversation, because they may or may not be willing to pay that. And if the seller is not willing to pay that, then the buyers would have to pay their agent, because everybody, you know, gets paid to work. And so what's changing now is they felt like that process was not very transparent, and that people didn't feel like they had an option there. And so what is changing now is that field on the MLS is going away. So when I look at a house, I will not know if that seller is going to be offering compensation, or if that's something that my buyer is going to have to pay. And so what that's going to require is a conversation with the listing agent of like, hey, is your buyer or is your seller willing to offer compensation? If the answer is yes, okay, that's, that's great. How much? Is it how much that I work for? Okay, great. Or it's going to get put into a contract, that when we send over a contract on a house, that's going to be part of the contract of saying the seller to pay this amount.
Okay.
And so it won't change my conversations with sellers all that much, because what's important is I usually say, hey, I work for this amount, and I recommend you offer this amount for a buyer's agent. And if that seller agrees to it, that's great. If they don't want to, I'll say that's fine. You can offer any amount for the buyer's agent. But I need you to be prepared for a couple things to happen. So if you're not going to offer, what typically covers the buyer's agent cost, then you're going to probably end up with one of two things. Either you're going to limit your buying pool, because oftentimes when you're buying a house, you cannot pull together enough funds to pay for a down payment, closing costs, and a buyer's agent.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, you're in a situation where, cash is not always flowing.
Exactly.
And so
that's a lot of cash.
It is a lot.
Yeah.
It is. When you add all that up, that's a considerable amount of money. And so if you're not willing to pay that at all, and that's going to become the buyer's responsibility, you're going to limit your buyer's pool of who can look at your house.
Right.
So you're either going to do that, or you can expect to get offers where that's going to be a part of the offer.
Yeah.
They're going to ask for that. So you just need to plan and know that you're expecting those things if you're only going to offer this amount, or if you're not willing to offer, that commission. And so that's one of the big changes as far as that. But as long as everyone is really clear on what to expect with it, it shouldn't be a huge, huge difference. It'll be a little bit more of a negotiation, I think, than it has in the past. The other big change is that now, before anybody can go to see a house, there will have to be a written agreement with the buyer and the buyer's agent, which spells out how much that buyer's agent works for. And so that as a buyer, you're not going in thinking like, oh, I don't have to pay them anything because it's all going to be paid by the seller. So they need to know that, hey, I work for this amount. If it's paid for by the seller, that's great. You won't have to pay anything. But if it's not, that will be your responsibility. Right. And so that everyone's on the same page there.
Where did this change come about? Like, what was the reason behind? I mean, it doesn't seem too significant, but it seems like there's now more transparency, but also a little bit less transparency. And it seems like there's now more responsibility on the buyer's side. If it's not a buyer's market, they might be now double screwed, I guess, for lack of better words, when it comes to having to also pay a commissioning structure.
Yeah, that's kind of part of the fear, which is interesting because in the early 90s, this typical structure was kind of put in place because there were a lot of lawsuits that buyers were being taken advantage of because they didn't have the money to pay for their own agent, and so they were going in unrepresented, and then the seller had the upper hand because they had representation and were taking advantage of buyers sometimes. And so there were a whole handful of lawsuits at that time, and so that's kind of where that became normal for the seller to take care of all of it so that both people could have fair representation throughout this really big transaction. And so so that's definitely kind of a shift. Like the goal is transparency, but I think the fear is that some buyers will go in unrepresented because they won't have the money to do it, and there's a house they really want. So the hope is that with enough education and
education's going to be huge.
It is.
Do you think it's going to increase the time to buy a home? I mean, if there is like a back and forth, do you think that could add, an extra week onto the process, or should it be a little bit more streamlined than that?
I think it should be more streamlined than that. Okay. I think most people, we usually try to get stuff done within 24 hours. You have a limit of about 24 hours. Like I just, you hope that people are going to be responsive and things, which I guess isn't always the case. But I don't anticipate it really adding, a ton of time to the process. It stemmed from the lawsuit, obviously. And, I think it depends on who you ask as to what the motives were behind it. Some people mentioned that it was going to help reduce home prices, which home prices are not going down at all. The sellers may pocket a little bit more money. But there's nobody that's reducing the price of their home because they're not offering a buyer's agent commission. Yeah. Like, it's just, I've worked with
if anything,
some
they're just going
already.
to make a little bit more.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So, there were a lot of reasons behind it. But ultimately, it's just a very, very large lawsuit, and
that's what happens after lawsuits.
Yeah.
Policy gets changed.
Yes, exactly.
So what are some of the trends in the market right now? I mean, if people aren't keeping up with it, what's like, a 2-minute spiel on, where do we sit in the real estate market? Where are the trends going? What do you see, as a professional in the industry?
Sure. You know what? Real estate is very, very individual. So I think I can speak best on the Nashville market, because across the country it's very different. It depends on, are people coming to your city? Are people leaving your city? I'll say right now in Nashville, we have a lot of people coming into the city, and primarily from 3 main locations that I often see. And it's California, it's Chicago, and it's New York. And so that's where a lot of people are coming to Nashville right now from. The market overall has balanced out a little bit. So for the last couple of years, it has truly been a seller's market, where the seller just could sit back and let everybody fight over them. And that's really hasn't been the case the last about year or so. So it's been more balanced in that it may take 60 to 90 days to sell a house. If it's been on the market for more than 3 days, there's nothing wrong with the house.
Expectation management.
Yes. And you also can't really just throw a random price up there and expect that people are going to fight over it anymore. So you really need to price your home appropriately, and it needs to be in a condition that it shows well. Mm-hmm. So if you are pricing your home properly and it's showing well and you have it in a great condition, those are still going, pretty quickly in the area. I would say Nashville has a pretty insulated market because of the growth that we have, the amount of industries that are coming in, the amount of businesses, the amount of jobs, and just the appeal of the state in general with no income tax and all of that still is bringing a lot of people into the city, or into the state in general, not even just the city. And so that helps with, where things are slowing down other places. In Nashville, they're still staying consistent. So the price of home prices over the last year are still increasing. So the time on the market is taking longer, but the home prices are still increasing. They're not decreasing. They're not dropping.
Because there's, 80 to 100 people a day that are moving to Nashville. That's it. That's a crazy number.
Yes.
It's a lot of people.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
So the number of transactions has gone down a bit. If you're looking year over year, from July of 2023 to July of 2024, the number of transactions decreased, but the price has not decreased, which that's good for the market. I mean, you want to maintain price. And I have some clients that say, well, I've been noticing people have been doing price drops. I'm like, that's not indicative of, home values decreasing. Yeah. I'm like, here's the data from the MLS from July of 23 to July 24. Condos and single family homes all increased still over that course of that year.
Because they're also building a tremendous amount here in Nashville. Do you see more, people that are coming from these other states? Do they want to live in a brand new build, or are they looking to buy from someone who is selling currently?
I would say, a lot of times people coming from other states are wanting to go a little bit more rural, and they're looking for some land.
Makes sense. And it's beautiful.
Land, and they'd like to build on some land. Everybody have their American dream there. So I think that's common. I think new construction is popular, especially for newer homeowners, because it takes away that fear of
what's wrong, what's behind the scenes that I don't know about. Yeah,
exactly. And so
they're throwing those things up so fast.
Yes, which is also why I recommend a home inspection on a brand new construction.
Yep.
I mean,
we bought a brand new build, and there are things. I mean, we bought in 2021. It wasn't even done being built yet when we had said, yes, this is the home for us in Nashville. And there's some things that I wish that we had taken a little bit more, we had looked at before.
A pre-drywall inspection I usually recommend, and then a final inspection also.
Yeah. I don't know if they even really painted, to be totally honest. I think it's
all primed. They just left it blank for whatever you wanted.
It great. You really can't tell, but when you start to look around the house, you start to notice little things. You're like, that's on backwards, and I don't know if there's paint on this wall, and wait, why did our railing just fall out of the wall? Like, there's no stud there.
No stud. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, little things I think homeowners need to just, new buyers, especially in new builds, just pay attention to little details. Don't get so caught up in just like, oh, this house is so nice, there's a really cool accent wall,
Right. Yes. Yeah, and the pretty shiny stuff.
Yeah, because that's what I did. I fell for the accent wall.
It'll get you every time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so they're typically moving into like the more rural areas, what you're seeing. New homes are being thrown up left and right. Any other trends that you're starting to see in the market, like emerging, or are things starting to just kind of calm down a little bit?
Yeah. We'll see what happens. So interest rates have been dropping.
Oh, yeah, let's talk a little bit about that.
So that's, interest rates have dropped down to the low sixes. I mean, depending on what kind of loan you get and how your credit is, I've even seen the high fives. And so that's a huge difference when you're looking at, in October, we were up at 8.
Yeah.
And so that's a big fluctuation from high 5 to 8 on how much you can afford. And it brings a whole pool of buyers that, got priced out of the market back into the market because with a lower interest rate, your monthly payment is lower. And so you can afford a house again.
Yeah.
And so for those homes that have been sitting on the market and maybe not, getting the traction because the buyers just haven't been out there looking, it's going to bring a lot more buyers back into the market, which then,
Just starts
equals more competition.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll be curious to see kind of what that looks like.
It's so cyclical, I find. It's just
is.
always, you just got to wait for the right time. So is right now a buyer's market or a seller's market?
It's pretty balanced. I think so that what determines if it's a buyer's or seller's market is the amount of inventory that is on the market. I think technically it is still a seller's market, just barely. But it's pretty balanced.
Probably with those low interest rates now, we're going to start to see it transition more into a buyer's market.
Right. Right.
Very nice. What are some of the biggest mistakes that you see homeowners when they're purchasing a new home?
I think not taking into consideration all of the cost that's going to come along with it. And that's, I won't say, you get all the way through the home buying process without that, because hopefully myself or your lender has educated you. But I think that's something when you're starting out the home buying process to know, closing costs. Like that's a sneaky
What are
little
some of
thing.
What are some of the sneaky fees that homeowners are like, wait, what is, I was not expecting this.
Yeah. So your closing costs are going to be 3 to 5% of the value of your loan. So if you are borrowing $300,000, you can expect $9,000 to I can't do the math top of my head.
Public math, not good at it. I get it.
Yeah, you can expect $9,000 to $12,000 in closing costs for a buyer. And so you think, oh, look, I've paid my lender, I've paid, my loan, I've paid all that kind of stuff. My seller is hopefully paying my buyer's agent commission. I don't have to worry about any of that. And then you get to closing, and you're going to have additional fees. So those fees go towards things, they go towards the lender to pay for all of the fees, all of the work that they have done, their appraisal. It's going to go towards the title company to pay your title searches, your title insurance. You pay for a lender's title policy, which is non-negotiable. You have to. You should also be paying for your personal title policy. So there's a lot of fees in there. In the state of Tennessee, you have a recording fee to record the deed. You have very low property taxes and you have no income tax, so they're going to get their money somewhere. And so
and there it is.
Yes, so you're going to pay anytime you buy and sell a property, you get there's a recording fee. So all of those are going to add up for closing costs. So hopefully, you should not be getting to the end of the process and be surprised by that. But when you're first starting the process, that might be a surprise.
And do those fees, I would assume that the person that you're working with, your agent, is going to disclose what those fees will be. Is there any way that you could add that onto your loan and then make monthly payments on that? Or is it something that you have to just pay out of pocket up front? Yeah,
so they can't be rolled into the loan because the lender is only going to lend on the value of the home.
Okay.
Because they don't want to be giving you money for something that doesn't have value.
Yeah.
Yep, because if something push comes to shove, they want to get their money back if you're not paying on that house. So it can't be rolled into the loan, but there are a lot of different programs for that. So a couple different options is you can ask the seller to pay for those. So that's called a seller concession. So I might ask for $10,000 towards closing costs. So if cash is really strapped from my buyer and I know that's going to be an issue, I might ask that seller for money towards closing costs to help cover that. They also have different programs that what they'll do is almost be a second mortgage.
Okay.
It gets rolled into a monthly payment.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not the value of the home, but it's a second mortgage that they can pay on monthly as opposed to having to have that big chunk up front.
Right.
And so there are different options with that. And that's where it's important to really talk with your agent and talk with your lender. Like, hey, like, I can add an extra $100 or $200 to my monthly payment, but coming up with that money up front is going to be tough. So that's important to know so we can structure our offers properly to the sellers to say like, hey, we might even offer a couple $1,000s over your asking price.
Yeah.
And in return, ask for cash at closing. The seller doesn't care. It evens out. Like, doesn't make a difference on how they're getting that money.
Right.
But that could make a big difference for you as a buyer.
It's super interesting that, there's so much at play. There's so many different ways that you can negotiate, so many different ways that you can structure it.
Yes.
And that's why you need, your services and everything, especially for women that have never done it before.
Right.
Because that is confusing.
Yeah.
There's a lot.
There's a lot. I know I have never had a transaction that has been the same as another one, which is part of the reason I love it, but it also is something that I'm like,
keep you on your toes.
Can't I just like know it yet? But every single time it's been something different, which is great because it's, constantly learning, but everyone's situation is different. Everyone's financial situation, what they're looking for, what they need, the seller, like everything is different in every single transaction. And so there's not just you do this and then they do this and then you do this and then we're done. Like it just doesn't.
And then for you too, it's a competitive industry. You're trying to get new homeowners and everything. So what are some of the things that you think like differentiate yourself other than obviously you have women who own that is a huge one, but is there anything else you could think of that, stands you out above, the rest of the agents that are out there?
Yeah, it is. So obviously the women who own piece, because I really love that piece. I also am, as we said, almost native to Nashville. I'm very, very familiar with the area here, and the surrounding areas. I love it here. I'm very knowledgeable on all of that. And then I also would say that, I had friends or somebody commented when I moved into real estate, it's like, oh, you're in sales. And I thought, ooh, like I am not a salesperson. And so I've really thought a lot about that because I'm like, I am just, that's not me. And so I think my focus on education has helped to kind of set me apart too, is that, specifically when I'm working with a buyer, like I am not going to sell you a house. Like I will provide you all the information and make sure that you are very, very knowledgeable about it and you understand all of the possibilities.
No buyer's remorse.
Right. And then you make the decision that's best for you. And so really kind of framing like my business and my mindset around education, I think is different than just, like, hey, let's go for it. It's a good plan. Right.
Yeah.
No.
It's educational.
And so my goal is that then I'm, working with your sister and your mom and that's been happening over the last couple of years, which is really fun to see. Yeah. And that's the highest compliment ever. If somebody, recommends you to like their parent,
their family member.
Yeah. Which I just had that conversation. I'm like, oh, thank you.
Yes.
And so I think really having that focus helps because that, it might take 6 months, it might take a year to find the perfect place, but I have the patience.
Yeah.
And,
obviously you're incredibly knowledgeable about everything that's going on. So I think that's like, you talked about the education piece, but just like your expertise in the industry is definitely stands you out.
Yeah. I appreciate that.
And then talk a little bit about simpliHŌM. How do you enjoy working with that brokerage? What are some of their differentiators among all the other brokerages that are here?
Yeah. I love it. So I've been with simpliHŌM for the last 2.5 years, and they'd probably still be considered a startup, although they're quite large now. But when I started in there, I think we were around 200 agents in the Nashville area, and 2.5 years later, I think we're well over 500 agents. And so Sean is our CEO. Started the company probably about 5 or 6 years ago, and he is a go-getter, and he really believes in making real estate simple. And that's where he came up with simpliHŌM, is that it should be a simple process for buyers, for sellers, and for agents. And he focuses a lot on the agents and making sure that they have the resources and the tools that they need to be successful. And ultimately, if you, as a buyer or a seller, like, it really doesn't matter what brokerage that your agent works for, honestly. The brokerages are really for the agents. They need to provide the support and the resources and the tools for the agents. But really, as a buyer or seller, you need to have that relationship with the person, the individual person. And so what I think is important is that as an agent, they really support us through a low commission structure. So we get to keep a lot more of our commission,
nice.
Which is very, very helpful.
Yeah.
And then they have just a lot of electronic tools available. And they also offer a free transaction coordinator for every transaction, which is about a $500 fee.
Yeah.
And that's just somebody that helps keep that transaction, in line and make sure all the documents are signed. They'll do all the support documents, send it out, organize, schedule
Probably
things.
Saves a lot of time on your end as well.
It does. It does, for sure. So that's a tool that a lot of agents, especially, people when they get really busy, pay $500 per transaction for. And that's something that's included with every single transaction. Wow. They have it for free. They also have a mortgage company and a title company. That's all under simpliHŌM.
Oh, so you can bundle everything.
Partner.
Yeah.
So he's just... I love it because he's constantly willing to make improvements, change directions. If something's not working, great, we're going to try something else. Like if you guys aren't happy and aren't liking this, then we'll shift because our goal is to make sure that...
Yeah, he's flexible.
Yeah.
He's keeping up with the times, obviously. Yes. If he's, bringing in new technology and everything.
Yeah, 100%. So, and it's expanded now to multiple states, and I think his goal is be in all 50 states probably within the next couple of years.
Let's go, Sean.
Yeah, I know. So he's definitely... moving things, shaking things.
Yeah.
What's the term?
Have you been with them since you've been started with Real? Okay.
I have.
Yeah.
Yep. I've been with them the whole time, and they've just been...
I mean, that's a testament, too,
sure.
Obviously, very low churn, I would assume. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a good culture, a good community, and just really focused on growth and support. So,
nice.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, thank you so much for being here today. I learned a whole lot.
Good.
That's for sure. I know most of the questions. I was like, wait, tell me more. Now I'm just genuinely interested. Is there anything else that you could think of that you'd love to talk about, or that you'd love to just give a piece of advice to homeowners that are out there, or new buyers, anyone?
Yeah. Okay. Well, so I'm going to share because I know your company with my home, and I had a situation just recently that made me think of you guys. So I have some sellers that we're actually closing this week on their house. They're moving out of state. And she is so particular and meticulous with everything. Like every record kept here. They've been in their house for, I don't know, 3 years, maybe 4. No, 5. I think they've been there 5 years.
Okay.
And she said, so I don't know if sellers do this, but I can provide all my list of everybody that I use for, all the services at the house. Is that something people do? Would that be helpful? And I'm like, yes, actually.
Yes, because nobody does that.
Right. Yes. I'm like, that would be very helpful. And people are always interested in that, but most people don't have that all together and in one place and have records of it. And when you do leave that, it makes the buyer feel like you're walking into a place that's been well cared for. They've got their ducks in a row. It's not something where it's been like, oh, I'm going to do this or take care of this, or I'm not going to do anything at all. Yes. And so when she said that, it popped in my mind. I'm like, oh, actually, I know of a company that is going to be, putting all that together in one place. But it reminded me of what you guys are doing at my home.
That's exactly,
Yeah. And so when she said that, I'm like, yes.
But think too, how if that made you as the agent, excited and more comfortable with the transaction, and then you could pass that on to your buyer.
Yes.
Yeah, that's our goal.
Yeah. You really can walk into a house, and it's the little things, but you can really feel when that house has been well cared for. And it's small stuff. I'm like, it's not going to sell a house, but if everything is painted and clean, the baseboards, are touched up. It's things that feel like it's been well cared for. And if I walk in and I see, we open cabinets, you open all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And when you open a cabinet and you see something so meticulously organized, or a garage that has every tool in its own place, and I'm like, I guarantee you this house is well cared for too.
Yes.
And sometimes they'll have a notebook full of, all the updates and the warranties. And I'm like, when you see something like that, I'm like, okay, they haven't been letting things slide, and it's the little thing that costs them nothing to do. But to me, I'm like,
Yeah.
Yep.
Now
They're
we'll
taking
take it
care
one
of
step
things.
further and we'll digitize all
Right.
of that. Yep. So that you don't have to hand over an actual physical binder
Yes.
to the new homeowner. You can say, oh, well, here's my home. Here's everything that's been done to to the property previously. It's digitized for you. It's organized by room. Oh, and by the way, if you need to know the paint color in,
Yes.
the guest bedroom, it's also in there.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And those are the things that as a buyer, I think it's just so nice to walk into. And, and it's something you don't even know that you need
Yeah.
at
It's
the
like
time.
the Carfax for your home. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just, or like, hey, your lawn looks really good. We'd like to keep it up like that. Like
Exactly.
in February, I actually had somebody that transferred all the stuff. I had the buyer and the seller was great and actually transferred all the stuff. But that was the same thing. They were like, hey, can you ask who the lawn care people are? And he was like, oh, I'll leave everything. Left a big file cabinet for him.
Yep.
And, but yeah, that's the thing. And I'm like, yes. that
Exactly. And then we
speaks
have
volumes.
and if they don't like them, guess what? They can find someone else that
Right.
they really do love and that they want to work with.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
all going to be there.
Yep, exactly.
We're launching on Friday. It's exciting.
Oh, that is exciting.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I know, we're getting there. Obviously, it's been about 6 months of development
Okay.
and working through everything and talking to as many people as possible to build
Yeah.
the most valuable product for homeowners.
Yes.
So it's super exciting.
What does the launch
Yeah.
look like for you?
So we have over 1,000 homeowners on our wait list right now. We've
Okay.
got over 80 vendors that are onboarded. We service over 35 different industries.
Awesome.
So launch is, I'm not saying that we're going to contact all 1,000 homeowners and just be like, hey, everyone, let's go. We want to do it a little bit more strategically
Sure.
so that we're not overloading
Yeah,
everything.
floodgate.
And so we'll slowly start to kind of do a warm intro
Okay.
to all of our homeowners that are on the wait list. We're doing a home show at the fairgrounds actually this Saturday
Okay.
and Sunday. So if you know anyone, either a vendor or homeowners, tell them to come on down.
Okay.
It should be a good time. We're actually setting up a podcast booth at the event itself, so we
Yeah.
can just talk to as many people as possible and gauge where their
Right.
interests are at. What do they like about the app? What features do they want to see in the future and everything.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Very cool. It's exciting.
start getting that out there.
That's awesome. That is awesome.
Yeah. But thank you, so much for coming in today. It was
Thank you
great
for
to see
having
you
me.
again.
Yes, absolutely. Thank
Yeah.
you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity, and I'm
Yeah.
excited for what you guys are doing, and would love to be able to have that as something I can
I know.
offer.
Well, hopefully,
to
we can make
buyers
your
and
life
sellers.
easier,
Right.
and everyone at simpliHŌM.
Yes.
If Sean's interested at all in the
Yeah.
future, I think there's a lot of advantages and ways that we can just help the entire industry. It's not just obviously about my home. It's about everyone that's touching the platform.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay.